Vladimir Putin said in a speech this week, Russia is looking for new friends as the West continues to isolate Russia. Do
Yeah.
you think other countries that have lost respect for the United States or no longer wish to trade with us will shift their allegiance over to Russia or
Yeah,
want to do business with him?
they are. Look, that's why they had the summit in Africa within the last couple weeks. That's why so much of what Putin's doing, Stephen, is not focused on Western media. It's not. That's why I would argue they've shown great restraint in the war. The way Putin has framed this war is that they, the Russians, are on a quest to establish boundaries based on their history. Now, let me go through this. This is never popular. Strike that. This is never popular with the neocons and others. The Russians have a well justified paranoia. I hate to sound, it's kind of a challenge to describe this, but let me put it out there as a fundamental justified paranoia. The Russians have been invaded. Let me go through the list. Mongol, 1337. The Ottoman Empire, 1570. Sweden, 1708, and they didn't get the meatballs out of it. France, 1812. Japan, 1905. The U.S. interdiction, us, 1918, with the White Russians. Germany, 1941. So when you examine these, as this is historic fact, this is not something I'm making up. When you examine this as the context of their culture, Putin's culture, Putin has found a way to harness this paranoia, for better or for worse. He understands the Russian mentality. He gets it. He's a Russian. So anytime you have the West talking about how they see Putin, it's like, yeah, whatever. Putin doesn't care. It's just like he doesn't care. It's like he's going to this other audience you mentioned. It's like the rest of the world. So he can hold up this list of countries and say, we've been wronged and we have the right of self-defense. And what we're doing right now is self-defense.
Yeah.
Now, we will disagree with that, but the rest of the world sees it differently. And two reasons to see it differently. First, he's got the list. He's got the recent history. And secondly, nobody believes the West at this point. There's been several diplomatic failures which have resulted in catastrophic outcomes. For Syria, the Western intervention in Syria has not gone well. U.S. going in there, basically one of the things that was required of our going into Syria and basically trying to help settle Syria with the Russians is that you need to get rid of Assad. Russia said, no, we're not doing that. Sorry. Oh, you need to do it. It's like, yeah, we're not. Sorry. And this is back during Obama. You had John Kerry, all these folks figuring out what's best for Syria, and Russians just saying, no, we're going to work with this guy. They stuck with him. Stephen, as we speak, I think Assad's still in power, right?
Yeah.
So the Russians stood up for Assad, and he's still there. That builds credibility.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we have places like Afghanistan where we say we're going to stand by them, and next thing you know, we're out the door and there's catastrophic failure. Just saying, I'm not anti-American. I'm simply stating my job, Stephen, as an intelligence officer, is to look at the other side and understand how they're thinking. This is how Putin's thinking. It's like, look, we stood by that guy. We'll stand by you. We'll go when push comes to shove. You may be a dictator, but you're our dictator, and we're going to stick with you.
Yeah.
So this means something to the third world. This means something to these other nations who have looked to the West for leadership and just been preached to. So that's the other part of this, is that anytime you bring in the U.S., you get preachy foreign policy. You get all the things that you see in woke, you get thrust upon you in a third nation. That includes homosexual issues, LGBTQ, XYZ, green energy, all these things that we see the Democrat Party pushing. You have become essentially the State Department has become a funnel. USAID. Samantha Power is over there in charge of that place right now. It's all woke. So, Putin doesn't have that. It's like, yeah, no, we're not going to push. We're not going to push our culture onto you. So those are the things, Stephen, that make a relationship with Putin superior. Again, I'm not speaking as like this is a good thing. I'm just saying this is what Putin is going for, and the rest of the world is buying into.
Yeah.
So that's the fact. It is as we used to say in spy school, it is what it is, and
Yeah.
you can't change the fact that this is the momentum. Putin's got the momentum. He's basically attenuating his messaging for the rest of the world, not us, and he's moving out. That's it. That's what's going on.
Yeah. Well, and I think that they're justified in their paranoia after losing 25 million Russians beating Nazi Germany,
Yeah.
killing Hitler, and you know, they gave a great sacrifice there. Speaking of other countries, the president of Belarus, Lukashenko, he came out this week and said that Russia and Putin are putting no pressure on him to join the war. He's only acting in the interest of Belarus when
Yeah.
it comes to Russia, when it comes to Ukraine, and when it comes to now this buildup of military personnel on the Polish border. Do you think he's telling the truth when he says Putin's putting no pressure, or do you think he's covering for a friend?
Well, I think a little bit of both. I think there's subtle pressure, but I think he's going to he's going to gain benefit. Again, Russia economy's coming back. The sanctions didn't work. I think you're gonna see some. I think it's a 2 or 3% growth, which is significant right now for them. Despite all the sanctions, I think you're going to see even more growth next year. You see trade increasing within the region. Yeah, why would the Russians, Stephen, the Russians are winning right now. Despite whatever the White House and the rest of the EU care to say, Russia's doing this. So why would Belarus and Lukashenko think about doing anything different? It's like, no, we're on board. They're on board because there's benefits. I often look at countries' relationships like high school relationships. It's like they're all kind of catty. What's in it for me? What clique are you with? Look, he's got all the benefits of being in the right clique with Putin at this point. I don't think there's any reason for him to deviate at all, and I think he'll do just fine. And again, I'm not just saying this because I'm pro-Russian. I think he's going to do just fine with the relationship he's got with Putin and Russia.
Yeah. I know the ruble is struggling a little bit, but it does seem the sanctions haven't done much, because let me share this information, this data out just this morning about the Russian economy compared to the United States. This is from Business Insider. So they say that Russians have added $600 billion in wealth since the beginning of the war, that they've added 56,000 new millionaires, and they've added 4,500 new people worth over $50 million. Business Insider then says the United States has shed $5.9 trillion during this same time frame. And if you combine North America with Europe, it's almost $11 trillion poorer compared to Russia, that's up $600 billion. So how can you have every sanction that they can invent against one country, and they're saying it's working, they're collapsing? Yes, I know their ruble is struggling, but this is data coming out just this morning from Business Insider. What are your thoughts on that?
So it's very clear, Stephen, that the Biden administration has miscalculated the potential for use of economic sanctions. I said back when we first started talking, and before that, that Russia had fully planned to deal with the sanctions. They knew before the war started, before the invasion, that there would be sanctions. And they had a long-term economic plan to deal with them. I'd say that their plan has been successful. It is. And again, I'm not pro-Russian. As a matter of fact, it's kind of funny. We've been targeted. We, the think tank, been targeted by the Russians because they don't like the fact that I call Putin a thug, which he is, by the way. Just saying. So, I'm just saying that they were adequately prepared to deal with what they knew was coming regarding economic, and they've done it. They've pretty much done it. The economic numbers speak for themselves. There's nothing I can add to that. The part of the damage to our economy, in my judgment, is the Bidenomics, which is largely informed or supported by the quote unquote Inflation Reduction Act, which in my judgment was a $20 billion payoff to cronies and political folks within the constellation of the Democrat Progressive Party at this point. 20 billion. That money flooded the economy. I think it depressed many things that would have otherwise been bouncing back by now. It has not had any net effect on gasoline prices. I just went out and filled up yesterday. Still double, if not more, than the Trump years. The Fed's talking about another increase, Stephen. I mean, you're more of a money guy than I am. You're talking about probably getting well past 6% interest rate, and I don't know what that's going to do to mortgages. I mean, I'm one of those who I've got a great. I'll just brag about it. A 2.99% VA interest rates. Like, I would never give that up at this point, based on what I'm seeing. You know, you're talking about torpedoing the economy. So all these things that the Biden administration's done has not only basically disadvantaged the American people. And think about this for a second, Stephen. The people who are most loyal to the Democrat Party are the ones most afflicted by their policies. This month I am paying probably close to $1,000 for propane and energy. Both bills were, I think, as a matter of fact, it comes out to about 1,000. Now, that's double what I paid last year. Do you think people who live on the border of the poverty line can pick up that plus food? I mean, these are people who are suffering through the Bidenomics. I'm struggling to absorb these new costs. I mean, we're all struggle. I'm technically on a fixed income because I'm a retiree. I'm a senior citizen, although I don't like talking about it. I technically am. So, I don't have a walker yet or anything, but just saying, but I'm sure everybody's struggling. And yet the people who are most afflicted, the most damaged, are those who vote for these knuckleheads all the time. So you see this, Stephen, every day. It's like you can't avoid it. And yet Putin has figured it out and figured out a way to move his economy forward, which is another reason. Think about this. This is another reason why the third world nations that Putin's reaching out to is going to say, look, Putin's a better bet than the West, because people do watch this.
Well, I put out a video earlier this week about Mitch McConnell. RFK Jr. called him out on a Tucker Carlson interview where he said they removed 30 million people from food assistance and 15 million from Medicare supplementation. And Mitch McConnell said, but don't worry about all of this, these programs going down and this money being shifted to Ukraine, because most of it's coming back to the military companies in the United States.
I've talked about this on your show.
And I was
in DC.
Yeah, I'm like, did you just openly admit that you're laundering money through Ukraine back to your corporate donors in order to be kept in power so that you can then ruin the lives of American people? Why? To get more money to Ukraine that funnels back to corporate donors. I mean, rinse and repeat. It's a literal laundry machine. It's insane.
The military industrial congressional complex. That's what Eisenhower warned us about, and it's thriving and doing very well indeed. So yes, he did. And again, that's my point. Nobody seems to be, except for RFK and Marianne Williamson. I like Marianne. I don't agree with her policies, but if you're going to be a populist, you got to accept the fact that the government is in bed, so to speak, with large corporations, and it's a laundering process, and the politicians get a little chunk to enrich themselves with it. So it's atrocious, and I don't know how people put up with it, but we do for whatever reason. And I think let's hit this real quick. I hope I'm going to skip ahead here a little bit. I don't know if you're going to bring it up or not, but Biden was criticized by the Chinese. They were making fun of him, by the way, about his handling of the fires in Maui. And one of the notable factors, you just mentioned Ukraine. How is it he's getting away with the idea of only paying $700 per family? I mean, as you know, Stephen, one of our staff, one of our team on Thought to Action and The Hard Truth, my radio program, lives in Hawaii, lives in Honolulu. Unless you're making $3,000 a month, you have. I mean, I don't know if you can live off $3,000 a month there because everything is so expensive. Are you telling me that Biden doesn't understand? Of course, he understands it's expensive. That's a joke. That's beyond a joke. That's tragic. That the idea that you're spending billions in Ukraine and yet you're offering the citizens of Maui who have had their lives upended 700. I could say 10,000 per person one-time payment just based on being nice. Let alone the idea of 700. That's like 5 meals on the big, in Honolulu. Yeah. It's just insane. It doesn't make any sense. And I don't know how, again, people are tolerating this sort of thing. So
Yeah. No, I said that on my show just the other day. Like, hey, sorry your mom's dead and you lost your house, but here's $700. I mean, and I'm seeing in like Telegram and TikTok, there's way more than 100 people that have died. I mean, they're going through,
yeah,
they're now finding senior care facilities where people were huddled together, burned bodies. I mean, it's just absolutely insane. The other thing that was kind of shocking to me is you have President Barack Obama, who's from Hawaii.
yeah,
He loves Hawaii. He vacations regularly in Hawaii. All of his rich friends have property in Hawaii.
right.
He said nothing about fundraising, helping these people,
Nope.
nothing. He's not encouraged President Biden. Listen, from one president to another, you got to get over there. You got to help these people. Like nothing, nothing.
Nope.
It's crazy to me.
Well,
I've been
again, this
by
is the
that.
party of compassion. Remember, Stephen, they're the party of compassion. So I just don't get it either. And again, Obama actually has, well, I think it was tragic. Another tragedy. He tore down the Magnum PI house and compound and put up his own thing there on Honolulu, near Honolulu.
Oh, I
On
didn't know that.
Yeah, no, he actually, this is a big thing. My friend Robert Hayes, Bob Hayes from Airplane, movie Airplane. He lives not too far from there, and Bob and I we're real friends, so we do talk. And he told me about how people there locally were just upset because that was a kind of an icon,
Yeah.
the Magnum PI's, that house. Obama tore it down and put up a wall, and it was hugely controversial because he destroyed the beachfront in process of building his house. So the reason I'm mentioning this is these people don't care. They don't care about tradition. They don't care about anything. It's all about power. To me, and I mean, I hate to sound like it's just about power. It's about power. They don't care about anything else. They will use any narrative they can get their hands on, from global warming and green energy to woke folks in the military and everything in between. If they believe it's going to bring them political power that's sustainable, that's why they do what they do. So, and that's why Putin is focused on what's best for Russia. The folks in charge right now in our nation are focused on a political party and a cause that gives them power. And I don't think it's going to work out well for us as a nation at this point. So,
Wow. Speaking of financial aid, Germany and now new NATO member Sweden plan to give millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in large financial aid packages to Ukraine. Is it time to stop all the financial aid from the different NATO nations, and these NATO nations instead put pressure on Ukraine and Russia to come to the table and end this war? That would save a lot of money, but more than that, it would save another 50 to 100,000 lives.
So Jan Stoltenberg's chief of staff has kind of floated this. He did a talk in Norway within the past few days where he floated the idea that Ukraine would give up territory and seek NATO membership. Basically, that was the proposal. Like, accept it's over. Let's go for a ceasefire. Now, between you and me, the Russians are never going to let Ukraine become a NATO member. It's just not in the cards. But But the very thing you said is the basis for this floating of this idea. And I think a lot of folks recognize that there's no there for Ukraine. You're not going to get to the point of where you've recovered the territory, you've taken back Crimea, and you've reestablished the pre, I don't know, 2014 boundaries of Crimea of Ukraine. So I think many NATO nations are waking up to this. It's going to be, I'd say, unfortunately, it's going to take another 3 months before people really internalize the failure of the Ukraine offensive. People, because the media is so committed, especially the British media, is committed to this lie that, oh, everything's just fine. They're just picking up steam. It's going to take some time for the level of defeat just to sink in. And yeah, all the money that's been wasted, 113 billion plus from us. Each NATO nation has been giving a certain percentage. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but it's a fraction of what we gave, but still substantial to each nation. And I think that the adults in the room there are finally recognizing, to include Stoltenberg, yeah, we're not going to win this. This is not winnable. Even if we try to expand the conflict into, with Russia, NATO's not ready to fight a war. I think it would be tragic and horrific if NATO even contemplated the idea of actually taking on Russia at this point. And that would, again, Stephen, prove it goes right into Putin's narrative. See, they're aggressive. This is why I'm doing it. They're aggressive. So it's a lose-lose for NATO. They try to become more aggressive. They prove Putin's point. They continue to support Ukraine. They prove Putin's point. There's just nothing they can do except, I think, at this point, recognize they need to start pushing the Ukrainians into the idea of some sort of a negotiated settlement. Again, looking at history, there's been times that nations have been partitioned and things came out okay. North Korea, South Korea, that war still exists. That war is an armistice. It's not completed. We have troops of North and South Korea plus us. The UN, technically, it's the UN, by the way. The UN went to war in Korea, so technically, it's a UN mission. Still face off against technically North Korea and China. China is the client state of North Korea. So that war still exists with a major world power, China and us. Who's to say that we don't do something similar with Ukraine? So I don't know. I think it's time we actually start looking at other options such as that at this point.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up how the British are, fighting so hard to control a narrative. When I read, British news and the United States news, you would think, Russia's losing every day of the week and twice on Sunday. They're running out of weapons. Vladimir Putin is a frothy mouthed mad dog. And then you read like news out of the Middle East, Pakistan, India, China.
Yeah.
They're like, the United States is the aggressor. Russia is crushing them. Russia will crush them. They have so much money, so much power, so many resources, so many bullets, so many bodies. It's like such a huge dichotomy, difference being presented to the world.
Yeah.
If you only ever read one piece of news, it's just so unbalanced.
Well, that's the thing. It's like it's propaganda because, again, I need to state this because I always get accused. I mean, at this point, Stephen, both sides hate me. Both the Ukrainians and the Russians hate me, which is fine. That's where I want to be pretty much. The British are purposely mischaracterizing the war for what they believe to be benefit of NATO. I really do believe somehow they believe NATO is going to benefit by a weakened Russia that actually is as hobbled as they want it to be. I don't agree. I think we've seen through the failure of nation states the increased potential for terrorist organizations and criminal networks to become more powerful. And look at Libya. Libya is a failed state. Syria is just coming back from being a failed state. I think you need to be careful what you wish for. And there's this perception that there's all these oligarchs that control Putin. I think it's the other way around. I think Putin has figured out a way to kind of corral the oligarchs. And so I think at this point, Putin is the guy. He's the strong man in charge. He's his generation's Joe Stalin. I mean, as I always say, you can take the man out of the Soviet, but you can't take the Soviet out of the man. I think many of the aspects which made the Russia work under the Soviet Union have been returned in just a different flavor, if you will. But it's still very totalitarian. A strong man is able to control things, and they're comfortable with that. That's their system. I'm not here to judge it. So
yeah. Final question. Vladimir Putin said this week, the West is doing everything they can to ignite conflict even more, to draw other states into this war. I know it's hard to get into the mind of anybody, especially Vladimir Putin, but do you think he believes the United States is trying to provoke World War III in Europe?
Again, let me state for the record, just for the Russians to be annoyed, Vladimir Putin's a thug. He's murdered people in elevators in Russia. So that I'll get my love notes from the Russian trolls. But no, I think Putin is saying that for purposes of the rest of the world messaging. The funny thing, many things the West has done actually feeds into the narrative that Putin's built. Putin has built the narrative that They are the righteous nation in this. As you point out, Stephen, other members of the media, other nations' media say that the U.S. is the aggressor. We're not the aggressor, but we're not trying to expand the war. I don't even think the sane folks at the Pentagon want to expand the war. Do they want it to enrich their buddies over at Raytheon and Boeing? Well, I'm sure they do. That's the game. That's the game, Stephen, as you point out. That's the game that Speaker McConnell finally admitted to. Leader McConnell says, yeah, we need to enrich our buddies over at Raytheon. That's what the job is here. So no, to expand the job and keep the gravy flowing, you don't want to actually have to go to war because people die then. And oh my goodness, you don't want that. So no, the Biden administration per se is not trying to get us into war. I think there are those who would want that. I think Victoria Nuland would welcome that. Her husband, Kagan, the guy that runs the Institute of War. I think Jake Sullivan is the kind of the control rod in that nuclear pile, if you will. If you use this as view this as a nuclear furnace, you got the Kagans and Nuland all wanting to go to war, and you got others being more reasoned. I think Biden sometimes thinks he would benefit from being a wartime president. I've said this publicly. I think if things get desperate enough, he would consider doing that. I think they would find a willing cohort in Poland to push some of this. I think Poland is more than willing to look at some of these sorts of things. But anybody who sits back and looks at just the numbers, and I am completely unemotional about this. If you just look at the numbers, right now, the numbers are in the Russian favor regarding Ukraine. If you add NATO into that, for what you would probably want to do, and I wouldn't even know what NATO would want to do. I don't even know what objectives you assign to NATO to do a military action, Stephen, to be honest with you. And regime change, the idea of, and Biden has said we need to regime change Russia. I don't even know how what does that mean? You're going to take Putin out? You're going to take the Russian Republic out? What exactly are you doing? So there's a lot of affectations that have nothing behind them coming from the West. And I think Putin knows that, but it benefits Putin by the fact it feeds the narrative he's trying to use for the rest of the world.
Yeah. I think Biden wants the best of both worlds. I think he wants to be seen as a wartime president that didn't put the United States in war and no military people died under his watch. Right. And then he gets to be the hero that gets reelected. I think that is part of what they are pushing for. And who knows? He may get that image. I don't know if he'll get reelected, but he may get that image.
I think you're right about the image. And by the way, if I were the Tillamook plant in Oregon, I'd be prepared for an invasion because he's after ice cream right now. I'm telling you, Steve. If I were Tillamook, I'd have like 5 layers of security around my ice cream factory. Yeah. But yeah, no, I think he's definitely trying to go for both. Yeah. And that's what politicians do. They actually kind of go for what they think will benefit them, and that's what Biden. I agree. I think would think he benefits him for the reelection, which, God help us if he's reelected. I try to be neutral on this, and as a matter of fact, I have Democrat friends. I actually like Marianne Williamson. A Tulsi Gabbard. I loved Tulsi back when she was a Democrat. I think she's a great. But some of these folks still recognize what was best for the country despite their party affiliation. Biden does not have any of that as far as I can tell at this point.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for coming on.
Yes,
this has been a great conversation. I don't want to hold you up anymore.